Good morning and welcome to the South Carolina Public Service Commission. We are here this morning on Allowable Ex Parte Communication Briefing in ND 2025-63-E. It is Tuesday, March 10th. Present in the hearing rooms, Commissioner Britt, Commissioner Caston, Commissioner Whitfield, and I am Delton Powers. Commissioner Belser is on leave. We've got one that hasn't been sworn in yet, and Vice Chair Williams is taking a course and may be in and out of the room. Ms. Wester Hill, if you would, please explain about this allowable ex parte communication and the rules that govern it.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the Chairman mentioned, this is in ND 2025-63-E. And we are here today on Tuesday, March 10th, pursuant to a notice of request for allowable ex parte briefing beginning at approximately 10 a.m. It is from Duke Energy Carolinas, LLC and Duke Energy Progress, LLC. The subject matter of this allowable ex parte briefing is, quote, the Voluntary Renewable Energy Programs, Community Solar Program, Standards for Interconnection and Parallel Operation of Generating Facilities and Solar Choice Tariffs. This is the same subject matter to be discussed in the briefing as was timely noticed by the Clerk's Office of the Commission on December 19th. This is a briefing and not a hearing. The briefing must be conducted in compliance with the provisions of South Carolina Code Section 58-3-260C. The requirements of the statute are in part that the allowable ex parte be confined to the subject matter which has been noticed. I therefore ask that the presenters, commissioners, and staff, and all present, please refrain from discussing any matters not related to this specific topic. Secondly, South Carolina Code Section 58-3-260 prohibits any presenter, commissioner, or commissioner staff from requesting or giving any commitment, predetermination, or prediction regarding any action by the commission or a commissioner as to any ultimate or penultimate issue which is either before the commission or is likely to come before the commission. Third, if anyone during the course of this briefing exceeds the scope of the briefing or does not comply with or fails to conduct themselves within the provisions of South Carolina Code Section 58-3-260 governing allowable ex parte proceedings, it is expected for that person or anyone to make a contemporaneous objection. And finally, everyone in the audience today will be asked to sign or register when they entered. If you didn't, please do so before you leave. In addition to signing in, everyone in the room will be handed a form on behalf of the Commission by one of our employees. Please read the form and sign before leaving today and return it. The form is provided to each person in attendance for the purpose of certifying that the requirements contained in South Carolina Code Section 58-3-260C were complied with during this presentation. This means that no person, commissioner, or commissioner staff deviated from the topic of discussion noticed by the Commission today for this allowable ex parte briefing or violated the law. Mr. Chairman, all matters are in order, and the parties and our designee is also here.
Thank you, Ms. Wester Hill. Would the counsel for the company please introduce themselves to the record?
Sure thing. Good morning, Chair Powers and members of the Commission. I'm Tekla Henderson. I'm joined today by Samuel Wellborn. Together we represent Duke Energy Carolinas and Duke Energy Progress.
Good morning and welcome. And on behalf of the Office of Regulatory Staff.
Good morning, Chair Powers and Commissioners. My name is Tom Flopoulos. I'm here on behalf of the Office of Regulatory Staff as the designee of the Executive Director. And with me is my colleague, Claire Bench.
And I'm going to ask you because I'm still trying to pronounce your name right. Tell me, do it again.
Flopoulos?
Flopoulos.
Yes.
I got it now. I got it. Thank you very much. I will let you go ahead and proceed if you would. Ms. Smith, you're starting. It's a different world when a woman gets to hold the remote control. And
I tell you, with great power comes great responsibility here. So good morning, Chair Powers and Commissioners Britt, Commissioner Caston, and Commissioner Whitfield, and especially good morning to those of you returning to the bench. My name is Heather Shirley Smith. I'm our Vice President of Regulatory Affairs and Policy for South Carolina, and I provide leadership for our regulatory initiatives here at the Commission, and I also do policy work on whatever the issues of the day might be. So I think we're ready to go ahead and get started with our presentation. Is it up? Yeah, okay. So this slide should be familiar. We just wanted to show the Commission's request and how our presentation will line up with the direction we were given. We will be speaking, of course, to voluntary renewable energy programs, community solar programs, solar choice tariffs, and interconnection. The next slide shows our speaker, and each of them will introduce themselves at the start of their remarks. And before I move to slide 4, I'd like to note, as you have probably already observed, that we have provided a lengthy PowerPoint. Don't worry, we're not going to cover every detail in here, but we put it together in hopes that these slides can serve as reference material for Duke's view of the requirements of Act 62 and how they have been fulfilled and are continuing to be fulfilled. I'd also like to note that Act 62, passed in 2019, was a pretty big piece of legislation. There are many topics in Act 62 that we're not covering today. For example, there were significant additions, like 1,000 words or so, I believe, to the Integrated Resource Planning Statute in Act 62, and significant additional provisions related to PURPA and avoided cost, meaning how we implement certain federal purchase obligations related to solar, and where the concepts of competitive procurement of utility-scale solar first arose. But it's also important to recall that we have been on a continuum of policy evolutions in the last dozen or so years. From Act 236 to Act 62 to Act 41, we really have been on a continuum, and there were other legislative outcomes in those years as well, pertaining to things like securitization and economic development. So what was going on in 2019 when Act 62 was passed? We were coming out of a lot of activity from Act 236, which jump-started customer-sited solar in South Carolina with certain incentives that are no longer available today. On utility-scale solar, we were challenged with different views on how long contracts should be, and there were concerns about whether there was enough oversight over resource planning and how utilities made decisions on new generations. And there were tax credits in the mix, and also a bit of a logjam for developers, for developers trying to get renewable facilities studied to see if it would be cost effective to safely connect to our grid. Just moving on to some of the more specific provisions, this is a part of that continuum that I described. Act 236 did several things, but I think the most notable was creating incentives around new solar, particularly customer-sided solar. That was that jump start that I mentioned. You see those costs in our fuel cases, as there are certain purchase-related costs and incentives that flow through our fuel rates. There was a wind down of these incentives plus certain rate-making adjustments that were necessary to make sure that participants in solar programs still pay the necessary cost of being connected to and served by the grid. That was addressed in Act 62, which continued support for renewables, but with additional guardrails. And Act 62 touched on those other topics I mentioned a moment ago. Act 62 had a lot of support across the industry from renewable developers and utilities and customer advocates. There was a lot of balance achieved in Act 62, and that was one of the key reasons that Duke Energy supported the Act. Here on slide 7, we've included for reference the statutes that allow for customer programs utilizing solar, particularly at utility scale, and our presenters will get into this in more detail in a few moments. We've also provided as a reference slide 8. This contains the relevant provisions to interconnection, how we make sure that new hookups to the grid, whether our own or that of third parties, can be done in a way that keeps the grid safe and that looks at upgrades that may be necessary for such connections to keep the system balanced and reliable. This slide also contains a statutory section that takes one step past that boost from Act 236 and operationalizes and resets rate making going forward to make sure for those who elect solar, rates are sufficiently designed to make sure grid costs are still being recovered from those making elections. And with that, I will turn it over to our next presenter.
Good morning. I'm Wendy Fleener, Director Clean Energy across the company's footprint. I appreciate you having us here today. Here in South Carolina, my team supports the voluntary customer renewable programs, which are optional for customers to participate in as a way to help reach their sustainability goals. As an example of this would be to visualize someone installing rooftop solar on their home, where they would use the energy and send any excess back to the grid under what would be a net metering type arrangement. There are also program options we have to help a customer with their sustainability goals without them having to install solar on their property. As you can envision, this is important for customers who may be renters, not have roof space available, or be in a position to make the investment required to install solar. Here's a timeline snapshot as it relates to the customer renewable programs. We have managed and evolved our offerings since 2015. Next, I'm going to walk you through these offerings in greater detail. Our journey of customer renewable programs starts with those that were enacted under Act 236. Here you'll see the solar rebates and shared solar are two of our legacy programs. The solar rebate program provided upfront incentives to customers to encourage new solar installations on the customer's property, and this ended in 2021. The shared solar program allowed a path for customers to have access to participate in renewable energy without having to install solar panels on their property. This shared solar program is still active today. Now I'll move to Act 62. Where there are two buckets of customer programs, both of which don't require customers to have to install solar panels on their property. The first bucket I'll speak to you guys on is the voluntary renewable energy programs. Green Source Advantage, or otherwise known as GSA, is a program designed for large business customers. It's a three-party arrangement between Duke Energy, the customer, and a solar developer of the customer's choosing to be able to bring a new renewable resource online. The new renewable resource would be somewhere on the local grid versus needing to be on the customer's property. This statute was drafted in a manner consistent with actions that the company was already planning, as we already had a GSA program proposal out there. While there is capacity available in the program, I want you guys to know that that's okay. The intent of the program is to have an option for our current and new customers that may be looking to move or to expand their operations here in South Carolina. It's a complex program that does require significant effort to be taken by the customer. The company, though, used that feedback on Green Source Advantage being complex to develop a new offering known as Renewable Choice. And you'll hear a little bit more on that from me shortly. Next, I'll move to our second bucket under Act 62, which is the community solar programs. Under community solar programs, the Commission looked at our existing shared solar program that was developed under Act 236, as well as extensive stakeholder engagement took place. It was determined that our existing shared solar program was the appropriate offering. Moving forward, though, the focus on new customer offerings will be options that can meet the criteria as outlined in Act 62. This brings us to where we are today. The intent and vision for our programs is to continue to provide attractive offerings to our customers in the most effective way possible, and also to provide benefit to all customers by the monetization or sale of the environmental attributes. Renewable Choice, which I mentioned earlier when talking about Green Source Advantage, was based on the feedback that legacy program can be challenging to execute, and we were directly asked for a way for customers where they could simply partner with us on renewable generation. Renewable Choice addresses the need for a simpler, straightforward option for our customers. We have already seen evidence of this with our first enrollment window, which took place in fall of 2025, where 2026 solar capacity was 100% subscribed to. Both Clean Energy Impact and Clean Energy Connection were designed as additional option for customers to be able to have access to renewable energy. The company is committed to continuing to provide as much accessibility to customers as possible. We have filed an informational letter to the Commission back in February of this year to share that we now believe there may be a simplified and efficient way to do so. We will be engaging in stakeholder discussions, including with ORS, later this month. With that, before I turn it over to our next speaker, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Any questions at this time?
Mr. Chairman, I do.
Commissioner Brett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Fleener?
Fleener, yes.
Yeah, I'm just kind of trying to understand about residential solar.
Okay.
And, you say y'all were 100% subscribed at the end of 25?
So the program Renewable Choice is a large business
Okay.
program. That is not for residential customers.
All right. On the residential side, how do y'all, how are you doing there?
Yeah, so the program that we would have actively available today would be our shared solar program, which does allow for residential participation. And so then the last piece that you saw on where we are today, that's what we're going to be engaging with stakeholders on later this month, on looking to the most efficient and attractive way to continue to provide offerings to residential customers.
On residential, solar, what does it typically cost an owner, to set it up? And then what kind of savings can they realize?
Yes, so I may, for kind of the savings on a monthly basis, but that does require typically an upfront cost for, our customers. So depending on the size of the system and some other considerations, they're probably looking towards, a system close to all in of maybe $50,000. There was a time, where there were some tax incentives and other things that were available, but that environment has continued to shift.
So if someone wants to do residential solar, it's going to cost them about $50,000.
That would be kind of just a rough estimate.
Well,
yes.
that's helpful.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you, Commissioner Brett.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Whitfield.
I said I didn't have a question, and now I do. Kind of following up with where Commissioner Brett went, you talked about the shared solar still going today.
Yes.
Which I guess you're referring to community solar. And of course, he asked you some questions about residential. And then, of course, the 100% subscribe part you're talking about in October 2025 is the large business users, right?
That is correct.
And so I guess if memory serves me right, I don't think any of you have used this word yet, but Act 236 had caps on it. And therefore, the only one I see that you mentioned you still have going is the shared solar. Were there no caps on that? I know there were on residential, and I know there were on large industrial, but were there no caps on the community? The one you say is still going today, the shared solars, were there caps on that?
Yes, so great question. So there are caps. There are 3 solar facilities throughout the state that are part of that program. So we're not adding additional capacity, but it runs depending on the jurisdiction through the end of 2028 or 2029. So it was a 10-year program.
10 year, okay.
Yeah,
and
over 10
and
years.
Act 62, if I recall, removed all the caps from Act 236. The caps on residential and large business, large industrial.
Did you want to?
Yeah, that's a great segue for the rest for where we're about to go, I think. 'Cause,
Okay.
we can go to slide 19.
Well, I'll stop right there, Mr. Chairman.
Well, if I may,
Commissioner Caston.
Slide 12, and I don't remember if it was Ms. Smith's or yours. Where on the rebate part,
Sure.
it talks about 65 million in rebates provided 2,658 customers. Is that a mix of customers? Is that residential? Is that residential commercial? Does that include industrial?
Yeah, so it was a mix. You know, I could provide some of the examples per jurisdiction. So, you know, in Duke Energy Progress, it was 673 small scale, so less than 20 kW. And then it was 28 large solar facilities. And then in Duke Energy Carolinas, it was 1,861 small solar sites, again, less than 20 kW, and 96 large scale solar. So it was a blend.
Okay. And so it wouldn't be accurate, you know, taking 65 million divided by 2658, say it'd be 24,000 plus.
That's correct, because it was paid on the size of the system.
Okay. And on slide 14, I want to make sure I understand this. The status and customer impact, which says 10 megawatts of 250 megawatts subscribed, and that may have been what you just answered, but does that mean of 250 megawatts set aside, only 10 megawatts is subscribed at this point?
That's correct. Under the program tariff, it's up to 250 megawatts. We have 10 subscribed. And this was the program option, you know, that I wanted to kind of point to, that this is a complex program. It offers or requires significant effort kind of by a customer. And so the intent of this was really to provide an option for our large business customers and economic development moving into the state. And so, you know, we have then evolved to Renewable Choice, which we think is a more attractive, easier option for our customers to contract on. We didn't take this offering away. We want to make sure that we have, you know, the choice available. But that is where we stand today with the 10 megawatts subscribed.
And all of these programs as approved had no cost shift.
The programs that would be under, yes, Act 62.
Thank you. And
Thank you.
if I got the wrong slide, I apologize, Ms. Smith.
I have one question. With the subsidies and the government programs that have ended, has that caused a dip in new solar development or new solar desire by parties?
Yeah, so we do, with a later speaker, we do have some kind of net metering, kind of adoption rates with interconnection. But I would say, you know, from my viewpoint and what I've been hearing, yes, I do think that we are going to see a little bit of a slowdown, because, again, that is making the financial decision that a customer has to make more expensive than it would have been before the end of last year.
And it might not be directly on point, but is that happening also with electric vehicles now that the subsidies are not there?
I don't personally manage, you know, the electric vehicle, you know, segment at Duke Energy, though I would say, you know, I do think some of the decisions, again, are likely seeing the same impact. Anytime where there's an upfront incentive that's available, you know, to customers, whether it's, you know, for solar installation or anything else, I do think that poses more of a challenge. It's a headwind.
Thank you very much.
Of course.
Right. Chair Powers, my name is Tyson Grinstead, and I'm the Director of State Energy Policy for Duke here in South Carolina. And I, along with my colleague Morgan Beveridge, are going to talk to Commissioner Britt and Commissioner Whitfield's questions a little bit about rooftop solar. So Witness Fleener, when she was talking about residential programs, she was mostly focused on solar that's off-roof, community solar. So we're going to talk a little bit more about residential rooftop solar, if we can get the slides back up. So Act 236, as was pointed out earlier, was really the catalyst for rooftop solar in South Carolina. Rooftop solar existed prior to that, but when Act 236 was passed in 2014, it came with it full one-to-one rate net energy metering. Solar leasing was created in South Carolina, and then Duke Energy had a very generous rebate of $1 per watt, which helped really energize the market and got companies moving here and solar being installed in South Carolina. And that was additive to a state tax credit that still exists in the law. And so to Commissioner Whitfield's point, there were caps on the amount of solar that could be installed in South Carolina. back during that time period, and it was 2% of a utility's peak demand. So we never thought we would hit those caps that in the time that we did, but we hit them from really 2015 to 2018. They got hit within 3 years. And that was what really what created a lot of stakeholder discussion, a lot of public input, and then what ultimately led to Act 62. Act 62, as Witness Smith said, was all about balance. It wanted to build upon the successful creation of the market in South Carolina while eliminating any cost shift to the greatest extent practicable. So Duke's tariff that came down from Act 62, which Mr. Beveridge will talk about, it is really a balanced tariff that seeks to eliminate the cost shift while keeping the market in place. And really what it's a more mature tariff that will last us into the years to come. And so I think it's something we're very proud of. And as y'all might remember, there was a lot of stakeholder involvement in the docket that created that tariff or got that tariff approved, along with a lot of public input. So with that, I'll hand the remote over to Mr. Beveridge, and we'll go into details on that tariff.
Thank you, Tyson, and thank you, Commissioners, for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Morgan Beveridge. I'm Director of Pricing Initiatives at Duke. My team supports rate cases and rate design across all of our jurisdictions. I'll go into a little more detail on solar choice net metering. So coming out of Act 62, there were two dockets that were important for net metering. The first was what was referred to as the generic net metering docket, and this looked at the methodology for valuing solar and quantifying those costs and benefits. The second docket dealt with developing the next generation of net metering tariffs, and that was referred to as solar choice. That was some language from Act 62. So those solar choice tariffs are that next generation of net metering. And I have the dockets and order numbers here for reference, but I'll go into more detail in the next slides. So rewinding, as Tyson was talking about, to 2019 timeframe, we were seeing headlines across the country of pretty contentious net metering proceedings, where utilities, solar installers, stakeholders were sort of battling it out, and we wanted to avoid that here. So we engaged a group of industry stakeholders over the course of a year and many working sessions to try to develop tariffs that would achieve the goals of Act 62, aligning costs and benefits, while also maintaining a strong solar market in the state. And so we did all that work before ever coming in and actually filing. When we did file, it was for these three tariffs, three solar choice tariffs. Two of them are for the residential customers, and one is for non-residential. A couple rate design elements I would emphasize here. The first is that monthly netting is sort of the basis for all three of these. What that means is it's recognizing that energy on a cool day in April does not have the same value as energy on a hot day in July. And so the difference in the cost of energy between seasons is recognized through monthly netting. And then we also have time of use rates for our residential solar choice tariff. That's also recognizing sort of the cost of energy changing through time, but within a day. So within time of use periods and different hours within the day. The last thing I'd note here is the non-residential tariff you'll see is a much simpler design. That's because we have more complex rate schedules for our non-residential customers. Typically, they have demand charges, time of use is much more prevalent, and they have provisions like minimum bills and minimum billing demands. So that basically just allowed for a lighter touch on the net metering side. As part of an agreement we had with stakeholders going in to file those tariffs was to build an online solar savings calculator. So this is available from dukeenergy.com, and customers can go in and put basic information about their usage and what size solar system they're interested in. And this will come up with estimates for your bill before solar, after solar, what kind of savings you could expect, solar production, all those types of things. And this is not a highly precise model. This is intended as a reference point, so that if a solar installer is talking to a customer and says, adding solar can take your bill down to X. Well, this serves as an extra point of reference for a customer to be able to say, does that make sense? Am I in the right ballpark? It just helps with early planning as well. The other thing this tool does is it has a monthly bill showing all the different line items that a customer would expect on the bill. And it has descriptions for those line items and some information about what will change before and after a customer adds solar. So overall, this is also an education tool to help customers understand the solar choice tariffs.
Excuse me.
Want to give
Could
Sure.
you go back to that slide for just a second?
Yes.
And I don't know if you're doing this in both places, but it says down in the corner, as approved by the North Carolina Utilities Commission.
I apologize. That was a snapshot. Must have been from the North Carolina tool. The two are very similar, but I did not realize that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So wanted to give you a little bit of information about how adoption has changed over time. So with the full retail rate net metering and the solar rebates under Act 236, that was from the 2015 to 2021 timeframe, that really drove a lot of the early adoption. The solar choice tariffs went into effect in mid-2021 and then January of 22. And you can see here that over the next few years through 22 and 23, we continue to see strong adoption. Over the past couple years, we've seen that adoption continue to grow, but at a slower pace. And that's really reflective of nationwide trends and a number of factors, key among them higher interest rates, reduced tax credits, other macroeconomic factors like that. I would also want to mention that commercial and industrial customers, we've seen growth in that segment. There are more non-residential projects, and we see those projects getting bigger over time. And so while there's a much smaller number of those projects, they make up a material part of the capacity for behind-the-meter solar. So you can see the blue in that graph is all the non-residential piece. So talked a little bit about where we are today and what we're still working on. So at the beginning of this year, we increased the limit for the non-residential tariff from 1 megawatt to 5 megawatts, and that was provided through Act 41. A key rate design element there is that above 1 megawatt, we require a time of use rate, and so that's helping to ensure alignment of costs and benefits under Act 62, and that went into effect just January of this year. On the residential side, when these solar choice tariffs came into effect, existing customers were grandfathered on the legacy tariff, but the solar choice order had a path to eventually transition those customers to solar choice. And so the first sunset date we actually reached the end of last year, and so about 2/3 of those legacy customers we moved over to a new design starting January this year. The remaining 1/3 will move over in 2029. Those customers have the option of staying on their current rate schedule and going on what's called the transition tariff, or they can go directly to solar choice in time of use. If they do choose the transition tariff, they can stay on that for about 10 years. And so if you think about the move in 29 and then transition tariff for 10 years, we won't actually have all residential customers moved over until 2039. So we still have a ways to go along this path. Lastly, I want to talk about stakeholder engagement. I think Act 62 really helped build the relationships and network and muscle to sort of build stakeholder engagement into a lot of what we do. So on this slide here, I mentioned that we have stipulations in our most recent rate cases to work with stakeholders on the next generation of clean energy programs. But I'll also mention that the increase under Act 41 earlier this year, ahead of that, we reached out to our network of solar installers, provided the tariff and the information they would need to communicate that change to their customers. And then on the residential side, early in planning, about a year ago now, reached out to stakeholders, including ORS, to review the timeline for this transition and the customer communications that were developed to make sure that customers would understand this transition. And worked with them to, we built a website that compared the two rider options for customers and gave them a chance to make a selection between those two. We also trained our Renewable Service Center. That's a customer service organization that we have specific for interconnection and behind-the-meter solar. And so they are experts on these tariffs and can answer customer questions on them. And then we reached out to customers about 6 months ahead of time with 3 different communications to let them know about this transition. And so I think Act 62, really all the work that was done under it has really built those relationships to kind of incorporate stakeholder engagement more into everything we do. And with that, I'll pass it off to our next presenter.
Hey, good morning. I'm Gary Sullivan. I'm the Director of Interconnection here at Duke Energy. My role is to oversee the generator interconnection process for the company and ensuring that we're interconnecting new generation in the most efficient and reliable manner. And so over the last 6 years, this commission has approved some major reforms to the standards of interconnection and parallel operation of generating facilities. So taking us really from a serial process that was not designed to handle large volumes of generation to now a cluster process. And so I plan today to kind of take us through that journey that has set us up for success for the future of connecting new generation and meeting the growing demand that we have. And so before we get into the details, I want to level set of what generator interconnection is. And so here to the left, you can see kind of a simplified traditional power grid where we traditionally had large generators that connected to high voltage transmission. Then those transmission lines would carry the power efficiently to load centers where we would have a substation step down to lower voltage and the distribution grid would take it to our customers. Fast forward to today, now we have power generation connecting throughout this power grid. So still on the transmission grid, but also we have smaller generators connecting to the distribution grid, as well as generators connecting behind the meter of our customers. And so because of this shift of this paradigm, we have generators that might be connecting where the grid wasn't originally designed to have power injected. So it's really important for us to have a standard way for a generator to request interconnection and for us to have a standard process to study it and to make sure that the power grid can reliably take power from that generator. And so we do that here in South Carolina through the South Carolina interconnection procedures. And today I'm going to focus mainly on Section 4 of those procedures and how Act 62 impacted them. So Act 62 called the Commission to consider revisions to the South Carolina generator interconnection procedures to ensure the efficient and timely processing of the interconnection request. And we've been fulfilling this call to action through really three major reforms that I'll walk us through. And these reforms came about through both our operational experience and extensive stakeholder engagement, and then ultimately approval by this commission. And so before we best appreciate those reforms, I want to talk about where we were before those reforms began. And that was a serial interconnection process in which generator would request interconnection. We would study it in a vacuum for that one generator. And that was okay until we started to have these new technologies, these new incentives that the panel discussed, and the interconnection queue became one of the best attractions in town. And when you're the best attraction in town, everybody wants to line up to get on board. And with that, you begin to have problems. So you have processing time problems. Then all of a sudden, that queue position becomes valuable. So people that don't intend to actually ride the ride gets in line and tries to sell their ticket to somebody else. That's what we call a speculative project. And then because of that too, we started seeing the grid begin to have reliability problems, and that drove expensive upgrades and interdependencies. But the current process had no way to do cost sharing. And so you can see to the figure to the right kind of outlines that in a very simplified way, where that first generator is assigned significant network upgrades. Then the second generator is dependent upon those network upgrades. And then the third and fourth, they're dependent upon them, but they don't have to pay for them. They just have to wait for them. But imagine a day where the first generator all of a sudden doesn't want to come online, and guess what happens? Those requirements fall onto those later queued projects that they didn't expect to happen. And so because of these problems, the interconnection queue became to a standstill, and we needed reform. And so what came out of that reform in 2021 is now where we live today in a cluster process. And so this commission approved that in June of 21, and we now have a defined set timeline for interconnection customers to get into the cluster, to be studied together, to provide us requirements, a set timeline for us to have to give feedback to them. We also introduced readiness requirements and withdrawal penalties to deter that speculative activity that we were seeing in the serial queue. And so some of those readiness requirements included site control, financial payments, and approved pathway for an off-taker. So show us that you're real. And then finally, because we're able to study you all together, we're able to have cost sharing and interdependencies handled. And so you can see in the bottom right corner, we transform that those relationships that the serial queue cannot handle. Now the cluster study can't handle that. All right, and so next was the phase 2. And so in September of last year, the commission approved the phase 2 filing, and really a big win and highlight of the call of Act 62 to ensure the efficient and timely processing of interconnection requests was how we handled behind the meter generation. So prior to phase 2, those behind the meter generators had to come through that cluster process because they were having parallel grid impacts. And that just didn't align with the timeline that those customers really needed. And so what we introduced was if you had 50% or less, you could be studied outside of the cluster. And so that took a process that was 22 to 34 months with an annual enrollment to a process that now is open enrollment. You can enter in anytime. And then the study process only takes approximately 10 months. So really a big win for those behind the meter generation for especially in the non-residential customers. Lastly, in October of last year, phase 3 was approved by the commission, in which it really continued to fine-tune that cluster process that was approved in 21. The major highlights for this reform, we reduced the enrollment period. We also continue to increase those readiness requirements and withdrawal penalties to further deter speculative activity in the queue. And then lastly, we formalized provisional interconnection service and engineering and procurement agreements. such that interconnection customers can utilize those offerings to have faster speed to parallel operations and commercial operations. And so where we are today is we now have an interconnection process that has multiple options to go faster if the customer desires to go faster, and we've been able to pull those behind the meter generator outside of the cluster and really efficiently study them, and so we are really set up to move forward and have a successful generator study queue. And so with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Commissioner, questions?
Chair Powers.
Commissioner Caston.
At a high level, I've followed most of it, you know, the cluster concept and all. And looking at one of the earlier slides, you know, the difficulties or the challenges with not only the queuing problem, but I guess if you waited long enough, you could let somebody else pay for the upgrades, and then you could slide in behind them. You know, where I used to work, we experienced something similar, and then we came up with this really fair system that became very, very complicated. Where the company is now, does it include or take into consideration that sharing of cost if you come on after an interconnection is done and it required X amount?
Yeah, so the cost sharing for the interconnection is, I'll say, bracketed by the cluster that you come into. And so I will say for sure we still see, you know, right now we've studied 18 clusters since the reform, and we've had 580 generators come through. And so right now we've got 204 active projects amongst the clusters. And so because of that, you know, 20 gigawatts of power, you do see network upgrades in cluster, I'll say cluster 1, then cluster 2 comes behind it. And we do see contingent facilities or facilities that, hey, this cluster requires, but is being paid for by cluster 1 because they're the one that's triggered. But that cluster, inside of that cluster, is able to share the cost. But we still do have kind of what you're speaking to. Cluster 2 kind of rides on the coattails of that available capacity.
Well, perhaps your fourth generation will even make it better. Thank you very much. That's kind of what I thought, but that answered it perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Caston. Mr. Britt, did you have a comment?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If my fellow commissioner, who's also an engineer, only gets it on a high level, being a liberal arts graduate, I'm in deep trouble. But this is a great briefing and very timely for me because this is all new. I come from business and industry, you know, not the energy side. So it has been puzzling to me and just trying to figure this out. And that's why I say this briefing is very helpful. If I gave you a magic wand and said, listen, going back 14, 15 years ago, if y'all had a chance to do it over and to do it the way y'all have got this 14, 15 years of experience, how would y'all set up the solar program, both residential and industrial? Would you do it the same as it is now? Or would you use that magic wand to say, this is the way we can make it work and work best?
I'll start from the residential side, and then my colleagues can jump in on the other two, because I think it might be a little bit different. from the residential side, it's hard. I think we're in a great place. And I think, we started out, South Carolina never likes to be first in the policy space most of the time. And so I think we learned from other states on how to get solar going in South Carolina. And then we learned kind of what they were doing in other states to help eliminate or reduce cost shifts. And then we met with stakeholders, we met with, the public, we met with customers, and we are in a place now where other states have looked at South Carolina and our structure here as a win-win. North Carolina followed us. Other states have implemented things that we've done. From a net metering standpoint, you sort of either have to decide whether to start from avoided cost or from full retail rate and either work up or work down. And so I think we're in a place where we started from the retail rate, went to a time of use retail rate, and then worked down to get the cost shift out. So we added in things that were cost shift reducers, things like netting at the end of the month, things like the charges that Morgan mentioned earlier to implement, to get to a point where we're not harming other customers, but we're at a point where we're more mature. And I think, there probably could have been a lot less stress involved from time to time with that, but I think we ended up in a really good space having learned from all the information from other states and from stakeholders in South Carolina.
Because as I listen to all of your presentations, and I'm thinking about, Act 62, was that an attempt by the legislature to really ask the question, does residential solar generate enough power to make it worthwhile for the utility companies to do this?
I would like to say yes. I think there are elements of yes from what I remember from back during that time. I think a lot of it had to do with we hit the cap and we had to figure out how to go on together as a state after we hit that cap. There was a lot of politics involved in that, but I think ultimately being in the room with Witness Smith, me, a lot of folks behind me, we all tried to figure out how do we advance South Carolina to a more mature place when it comes to solar, and I think we did that pretty well.
I would also add that a lot of Act 62 was about customers having options, how customers can have options in a way that makes sense for other customers who are not choosing those options. So when we opened up our presentation, we were talking about how Act 62 tried to propose some fair and balanced solutions for those who wanted to make other choices. And so I think it accomplished that. And so I think that was sort of a hallmark, and it's thematic when you look at the breadth of the act, whether it is from net metering or from the voluntary renewable programs for larger customers. And really, the bookends are the resource planning additions to Act 62, which really gave a guidepost for how are you going to plan your system, then how are you going to meet those needs, and that's where a lot of the procurement or some more solar specific provisions came in, and then how are you going to plug it in terms of the interconnection. So I'm not sure if we're answering your question, but that's how I think of what was sought to be accomplished.
So the guardrails that y'all talked about from Act 236, that was a start. This kind of brought it into a little more focus. Because, again, as I listen to Ms. Fleener's presentation, I'm a simple math kind of guy. If it's going to cost me $50,000 to invest in solar on my residential home, and I'm only going to realize maybe $1,100 a year savings, I kind of have that house and that solar system for 50 years even to break even. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. What were the incentives that the government was offering that made it attractive for people to do this?
Well, to answer that question, you have to look at the state policy and the state incentives and then the federal. So there was the federal tax credit, which was in place, which is phasing out. But then there were also within South Carolina, 10 years ago, it was a good time to put solar on your roof because you had if you were going to buy it, you could take advantage of the state tax credit and the federal tax credit. Duke had a generous incentive, and you could combine all those three to take that $50,000 into a very manageable place. Then, the incentive was a limited time to kind of, for lack of a better word, juice the market. And so, but you still had the full retail rate net meter, and you had all that scenario to help get the market started in South Carolina. So then now you still have, this is still a very good rate for customers, but we're in a more mature place where you don't have the tax credit at the federal level, but there's still a tax credit at the state level, and there's still a good rate for customers who want to put solar on their roof.
Very helpful. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Britt. Taking that one step forward with the scramble we're in now to produce enough power to build power plants, et cetera, do you see residential solar in the future as being a benefit to the company?
I think overall, and if anybody wants to jump in, they can. I think every little bit helps. And so as you saw, I don't know if we can go back to Mr. Beveridge's chart, but I think that's a good place to look, because if you start looking at the overall installed capacity, you see that growth. Even though it's kind of been more mature and more predictable, you still see a good amount of growth within that over the past 10 years.
And I think, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and every resource has its place. I mean, certainly on an August day at 3 o'clock, not a cloud in the sky, all the kilowatts are helpful to us. But it's not a central station. It's not a utility scale asset. And so, valuable, but what that value is compared to other types of generation, it's a sliding scale. But it's also important that customers have options. So on that August day at 3 o'clock, it might be helpful to us, but it might be really, really helpful to that individual customer who might otherwise be paying a higher fuel cost. They're avoiding fuel cost in the fuel rate because they're self-generating, and that kind of thing. So it's that balance, and then where the rubber hit the road really in many respects is what happens the moment that customer exports, right? So offsetting your own usage is one thing, but the minute that those electrons get exported to the grid, what is that value? And that value depends on the time, as Mr. Beveridge was talking about, and then what is being recovered from the customer, because even if they're exporting electrons to the grid and getting a credit from the utility, there's still costs. There's still wires. There's still, traditional generation. There's still folks sitting in the customer service center. So we needed to make sure that the customers electing those options were still paying all of those other costs. And so that's what we got right coming out of Act 62.
Thank you. Mr. Sullivan, I just had one question. You talked about non-residential reaching a point of, you used the term 50% are producing. Are the non-residential, besides the solar farms, let's say, are there any industries that are able to generate electricity back onto the grid, such as a Walmart or a?
Yeah, so we are working with our non-residential customers. I'll say to date, most that we talk to are looking really just to self-consume, and they see the exporting to the grid as a one-off, if I have solar panels or another generator and I've got my industry is down, can I go ahead and continue and just export it to you? But on my run-of-the-mill day, I'm installing things to reduce my footprint, to meet my internal goals. I'm not really looking to export to be a resource to the larger grid.
Thank you. Commissioner Whitfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is going to be real easy because Chairman Powers pretty much just asked it of Mr. Sullivan. My question again is to the large industrial, the non-residential users. You talked about, in not your slide, but earlier, 100% subscribed to the first enrollment window as of October 2025, I think. And of course, I think it's widely known that a lot of our large industries that were in the economic development field looking at our state were wanting in their profile sheets, say a lot of them put down, they wanted 100% of their generation from renewable sources. Now that you've got that subscription, and I think you mentioned, Mr. Sullivan, in your presentation, 50% of the nameplate in that cluster for that large industrial customer, I guess, and Chairman Powers was really right on my question, what benefit or what dent in demand, I guess is the word I'm looking for, is that making? We've asked that question on the residential. What contribution or dent, if you will, in your demand aggregate, if you could answer that, or if you can't understand, but or if you want to pass it to someone else, but what can you tell us is done in an aggregate amount for the company?
Yeah, so
I can take the first part. So the first slide you were referring to was our Renewable Choice Program. So that's where that was on slide 14. And so how to think about that program. So the subscription that customers are subscribing to here, which would be large business or it could be economic development. So it is projects that are coming online in the next calendar year. And so that would kind of be how to think about it. So new renewable resources. So these would either be utility owned or they could be third party solar sites coming onto our grid. And so this is where then the customer just comes to us and says, hey, we would like to partner on new generation. And so this was for, the 10 megawatts was actually the third party. I do apologize. This was kind of a bring your own project. The 100% subscribed was the renewable choice. So, but both of these options are kind of helping our customers. I don't know if that can tie into what you were then saying, Gary.
Sure. So I think from an interconnection process perspective, that 50% of the customer's demand, that just is a protection of, hey, you're going to kind of self-consume that power. You're
right.
That's push on the grid, right? So that's what sets those two things apart. I think that to what Witness Smith kind of said earlier, from residential over to the non-res sector, it's really the same thing. You know, if they have solar behind the meter, that is helpful on an August afternoon, but that's not necessarily as valuable on a winter morning. And so I think it has value there, but it's that time of use and what is the makeup of that behind the meter generation as well.
And I'd like to add, it has more of an effect on energy than capacity. So if you think of any of these self-supplied resources, those customers are still hooked to our grid, and we need to make sure that their power comes on, whether the sun is shining or the sun isn't shining, or whether what they're utilizing goes down. So we still have to be at the ready. So it doesn't hugely change what we have to build to serve the system, because we have to be there 24 hours as long as customers are hooked up to our grid. So I'd love to have one of our resource planners here to explain it better than I can, but I think about it more in terms of energy and capacity.
Got to have that two-way flow.
Right.
Thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Britt, you have something else?
I was going to ask Mr. Sullivan a quick question. You know, when you talk about solar behind the meter, what is solar in front of the meter?
Sure. So solar in front of the meter is basically a sell-all system. So it's pushing power straight to the grid for the grid to take it elsewhere to a customer. Where behind the meter, for the power to get onto the grid, it has to produce more power than what that customer is consuming. Yep. So that's the difference between in front and behind.
If you've heard of purchase power agreements or PPAs, that's typically a front of the meter arrangement.
That's right.
All right. Anything further from the commissioners? Ms. Henderson, do you have anything else?
Nothing further from the companies. Thank you.
Anything from the Office of Regulatory Staff?
Nothing from ORS. Thank you, Chair.
All right. Well, I don't know what I've learned, but I've learned that there's a lot I don't know. Thank you very much for your presentation. And I do think it's a lot to absorb, but it's very helpful, and we do appreciate it. Everyone have a nice day. The sun's out. You might get a little power going. Thank y'all. We are adjourned.